Good morning. It's Friday, February 9th, and thanks for joining us here at the Law&Crime Trial Network. I'm Stacey Delicat in for Jesse Weber, and today we are continuing to cover the high-profile retrial of millionaire Bob Ward out of the Orlando area. Bob Ward on trial for the second time for the murder of his wife back in 2013. I'm joined via Skype by criminal defense attorney Jayne Weintraub, and in a couple of moments, she and I are going to break down what have been some of the highlights so far. Today is day 3 of this trial. On Wednesday, jurors heard opening arguments, and yesterday we heard testimony from detectives, forensic experts, as well as the 911 operator who spoke to Bob Ward the night his wife was shot. Let's just recount some of the main points of this trial. Prosecutors say that this was a stressful environment in the Ward home. There was financial stress the couple was under. They said this was like two people sitting in a boiler room, and they say that Bob Ward has changed his story several times when it comes to what happened with his wife. The defense, of course, arguing that this was a tragedy, but just a tragic accident, that the two of them struggled over the gun. The gun went off, killing Diane Ward, shooting her in the face. The couple were married 26 years. They raised 2 daughters. Bob had run a real estate business. It had gone into bankruptcy. When the economy crashed in the late 2000s, the couple was still trying to emerge from all of their financial difficulties. Again, Bob Ward was found guilty back in 2011 of shooting his wife, Diane, of second-degree murder. At that time, he was sentenced to 30 years behind bars, but in 2016, a judge overturned that verdict, claiming that Bob Ward's defense team had made mistakes in their case. So this retrial began on Wednesday, as I said. Jayne, what has been the most interesting part of opening arguments in the first day of testimony, in your opinion, so far?
Well, I think, part of it is that I've always heard that this 911 tape, he admitted right away, I shot my wife, I shot my wife. I didn't realize till yesterday that he also said it was an accident. Of course, that's not in the one-page, single-space typed affidavit by the police. And I think that's crucial. It just shows how one-sided things are to begin with. I also learned that there was GSR, the gunshot residue, only on her hand and not on his hand. That is crucial. So I think there's a lot to be learned in this case, especially the fact that she had a 1:1 blood alcohol level. She had taken antidepressants, that one of the known side effects is it could cause suicide ideation. I mean, there's a lot going on in this case that we didn't see really at the beginning.
Yeah, Jayne, absolutely, that's right. And you mentioned the 911 tape. The 911 tape is a key piece of evidence for prosecutors because they allege that Bob Ward admitted to shooting his wife because he says, I shot my wife. Now, you're right. Up until now, when you read this on paper, you would think in this call he's saying, I shot my wife, or he's frantic. Interestingly, I found him to be extremely calm on this call, which I thought to be unusual. And apparently, according to prosecutors, after the gun went off, he put the gun in the nightstand, then left the room, went outside and called 911. I want to listen to the 911 tape, and then we'll come back and discuss it, because for me, I was most struck at how calm he sounds. And it's only a little bit later on in the call. The call is about 7 minutes with the 911 operator while he waits for law enforcement to arrive. It's only later in the call where he says it was an accident, and that's when she asks him whether or not it was an accident. So I think that part is kind of interesting. But let's listen to it, and we'll come back and discuss.
Now, what's the emergency?
I just shot my wife.
You just what?
I just shot my wife.
Where's your wife?
She's right here on the floor. We sent somebody a package, 77 Iowa Country Club Drive.
5277 what drive?
Iowa Country Club Drive.
Okay, address you're not giving me is not coming up. 5277.
Iowa Country Club Drive.
Firework?
Yes, Iowa. ISLEWRGH.
Okay, what's going on there?
I just shot my wife.
You just shot your wife?
I shot my wife. Yes, please. Send somebody over.
Stay online with me. Let me add the fire department. Don't hang up.
I will.
the weapon at, sir? Orange County Fire Rescue. The address of your emergency? 44.
5277 Firework Country Club Drive. Hello?
I'm here. Hold on just a moment.
Oh, I don't know why. I'm sorry.
That's all right. It's 1, 2, 5, 6.
No, it's 52. Yeah, 77 Firework Country Club Drive.
On there.
I just shot my wife.
Okay, where's the weapon?
It's in the,
Yes.
I'm sorry?
Where, is she breathing?
No, she's dead.
You know that for sure.
I think so, yes.
Okay, sir, where is the weapon?
It's in the nightstand next to the bed in the master bedroom. And I'll be glad to meet the officers at front door.
Where is your wife, sir?
She's in the floor in the master bedroom.
How old is she?
She is 1954, whatever that is. Born in 1954.
Okay, you're sure she's not breathing or?
She's dead. She's done. I'm sorry.
Okay. Sheriff's office, you're on the way? Yes, we are.
Thank you.
Okay, sir.
I'll be in the front door. It's fine. There's no weapon. I'm fine.
Okay, sir, we're on our way.
Thank you so much.
Sir, you need to stand up for me, but I just start to hang up. Office, please.
I'm sorry, say again?
Sir, did you purposely do this?
No,
Or was it an accident?
it was an accident.
Stay on the phone with me. Do not hang up.
I won't. Thank you.
Yes, sir. I'm here. And the gun is secure, sir?
I'm sorry, say again?
You do have the gun secure, correct?
Welcome back. You've been listening to the 911 call Bob Ward made to authorities the night his wife, Diane Ward, was shot. Prosecutors allege it was murder. His defense says it was an accident. We're going to discuss right after this quick break. Stay with us. Welcome back. I'm Stacey Delacat. Thanks for joining us this morning on the Law and Crime Trial Network. We are waiting for day 3 of Bob Ward's retrial out of Orlando, Florida to start, and we're expecting court to get underway at about 9:30. In the meantime, criminal defense attorney Jayne Weintraub is on the line with me via Skype from Miami, and we have been talking about some of the key pieces of testimony as well as some key parts of the opening arguments that we heard over the last couple of days in this trial. And right before we went to the break, we played some of the 911 call that Bob Ward made the night Diane Ward was shot, the night prosecutors allege he shot and killed her. Now, Jayne, what I mentioned before we listened to the tape is what's most surprising to me is Bob Ward's calm demeanor. I mean, he's totally flat, no affect whatsoever. If it was me, if it was someone I knew, you'd think they'd be frantic. Oh my God, I shot my wife. There's blood all over. I don't know if she's alive. He's so calm, cool, and collected. He's sure that she's dead. He says, she's dead. She's done. I'm sorry. What do you make of that, and how much does that hurt Bob Ward, you think?
Well, I think it's the shock value. You know, nobody knows until you're there how shock is going to affect you. I think that it's a horrible affect that the jury has to listen to. I think it will play into the verdict. Unfortunately, I think that it does not go out of that jury room that not only is he flat, he's kind of like, oh no, she's dead. She's done. And he did move the gun. Why? Nobody knows, but he did move it.
Right.
I think there's a lot going on. I also think, you know, maybe he had something to drink. Maybe he had ingested. Who knows? We don't know.
They have said that they were...
how much alcohol she had.
Right. We know prosecutors and the defense team both allege they were drinking that night, and they both had a history of drinking and using pills. But what about, you know, the fact that he doesn't come out and said, oh my God, it was an accident, the gun went off. He doesn't, you know, put this forth at all in the call. It's only when the 911 operator says to him, did you do this purposely or was it an accident, that he says it was an accident, totally flat. So, you know, maybe he hadn't come up with his strategy yet, or maybe he didn't think it important to say that early on in the 911 call. I mean, what can we make of that?
Well, let's give the benefit of the doubt until we know, because we don't know, and we're not supposed to speculate, and the jurors will be told not to speculate. The cold fact is, it sounds terrible. It's a bad fact for the defense. There's no way around it. You know, each fact can't be disputed, and every fact can't be, you know, something that's going to blow up in the defense's face and goes to the prosecution. We have to take the facts as they are. We know the gunshot residue is on her. So I guess the fact that he moved the gun to the night table isn't really of any significance. We just don't understand it. But after such a traumatic event, we can't appreciate what he did or didn't do either. When your brain works in a very funny way.
It's true. We can't.
When something so traumatic happens,
right?
You just never know how you can't predict how you're going to react.
Right. I agree. But what do you make of Bob Ward's demeanor and his defense team's demeanor when they're listening to the call in court? Because he's totally expressionless. I mean, he doesn't seem upset or distraught. I mean, is this something that we should read into, or that jurors will read into, or something that he might have been counseled on by his defense team?
That's exactly right. I mean, he shouldn't be doing anything except listening and not reacting, because if he reacts, then the prosecutor's going to say how contrived it was. Oh, now he's reacting. He wasn't reacting when he was actually calling, but now all of a sudden sitting in front of the jury that's going to judge him, he's crying or sobbing. So this guy can't win for losing when he listens to this tape. And if I were his lawyer, I would just tell him, just look straight and serious. His lawyers were looking more nervous than he was.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean,
they were fidgety.
Look, I know he's counseled not to express emotion and he shouldn't, but to me he was almost like, I don't know. If I was a juror, I don't know what I would make of it. Let's talk about the fact that prosecutors say that Bob Ward has changed his story several times. On the call, he says flatly, as we heard, it was an accident, but they say that he had actually sent an email before that telling someone that she had committed suicide. Also, if you read the paperwork from his initial indictment, the officers say they heard him on the phone at the scene of the crime telling someone it was a suicide. Then he says it was an accident, and then at one point he also told a reporter in an interview that he had been outside on the patio. He went upstairs. Diane was drunk. She had the gun. They struggled, and it went off. So they're saying, look, this guy has changed his story 3 times. Do you think that will fly with jurors?
I don't think it's really changing. I think it's different parts of what happened. For example, you know, we read last night that he actually had a cigar lit that was being smoked. It wasn't left. It was lit and being smoked on the patio. Now, that kind of is very corroborative in my mind of somebody who is smoking a cigarette, having a drink outside, or smoking the cigar, having a drink outside, and all of a sudden he sees her with a gun. And he just leaves the cigar, runs, and goes to help or struggle to get the gun away. That, to me, is very consistent with a struggle and an accident. So I don't see that as being inconsistent with it was suicide or an accident. I think it's all the same. I think that we are really nitpicking to look for something to make him more guilty than the evidence shows.
Well, if he's saying it's suicide, though, I mean, one might think, okay, that she said, okay, I'm going to kill myself. You know, that there were signs that she actually pointed the gun at herself or something. I mean, you know, to say it was suicide if there was a struggle over the gun and she was actually pointing the gun at him, I don't know if those two accounts line up necessarily. I'm not saying it wasn't suicide or she didn't, you know, have suicidal tendencies. We know, according to the attorneys in this case, that she had been taking anti-anxiety medications for a long time. She struggled with severe depression and anxiety. So we know she had a history of mental health issues.
I'm just 4 times the amount of that pill that she's supposed to take, on top of a 1,1 blood alcohol, in addition to trapezoid. There's another drug in her that she ingested. So, you know, there's a really bad combination of opioids going on and alcohol and a gun. This is so predictable almost, sadly.
Let's go ahead and listen to a brief clip from the prosecution's opening arguments when they talk about these different stories, and then we'll come back and we'll hear a little bit from the defense. This as we await day 3 of this trial to start.
From there, let's talk about what Mr. Ward has said about this case. There's the 911 call. The 911 call simply starts off with, "I just shot my wife." And he says that 5 times. In fact, he says, "She's gone, she's done. I'm sorry." That's what he says until the operator, after hearing all of this, says, "Is this on purpose?" He says, No, it was an accident. I don't know what happened." You're also going to hear that email that was sent just a couple hours later, where now Mrs. Ward committed suicide. Dramatically different from what he just said. And then afterwards, later on in 2011, he has an interview with Channel 13 and tells this reporter a lot of things. What Mr. Ward will say during that interview is, "I fell asleep on the patio that evening. And when I woke up, no idea where my wife was. I have no idea how that wine glass got broken. I have no idea how that wine got on the ground. In fact, I have no idea how that wine got on the back of my shirt. When I went to the sheriff's office and I went to the restroom, I asked them, where did this come from? Where did this wine come from on the back of my shirt, my shorts?" And so Mr. Ward, after waking up alone, goes upstairs, and he's going to empty his pockets out onto his nightstand at the side of the bed. And what his statement is that his wife, like imagine a thriller movie with the camera panning back out, is all of a sudden right behind him. This close, he shows, holding a gun, pointing it at him. This 55-year-old woman on 0.11 of alcohol and supposedly at 4.5 times the therapeutic value of citalopram, snuck up on him and pointed a gun at him. Without making a sound and without a word, he turns around and, taking the gun from pointed at him, in an instant, in a struggle, turns the gun 180 degrees, and during this struggle, that is how the gun goes off 12 to 18 inches from her face and kills her. That's what he says. And at the conclusion of the case, I'm going to submit that everything he said, those 3 different stories, simply, you have to take that into account under the jury instructions. Now, you're also going to hear about what wasn't done. They didn't test the holster for DNA. Well, you're going to learn a lot more about DNA, some of you, than others, during this trial.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll have much more analysis of this high-profile trial. Welcome back. I'm Stacey Delicat. Thanks for joining us this morning on the Law&Crime Trial Network. We are waiting for day 3 of the Bob Ward murder trial. This is a retrial to get underway. We're expecting that to start sometime around 9:30, but in the meantime, we're recapping some of the highlights of the first 2 days of this trial. And let me just recap the story for you. That is that Bob Ward, a millionaire from Orange County, Florida, the Orlando area, was convicted in 2011 of shooting his wife, Jayne Ward. Prosecutors allege they were drunk, they struggled over a gun, and he shot his wife. But in 2016, a judge overturned that conviction, claiming that Bob Ward's defense team had made mistakes. And so now he is on trial again for these same charges, second-degree murder of his wife, Jayne Ward, in their mansion back in 2009. In the first 2 days of this trial, which got underway Wednesday, we heard opening arguments, and we've also heard testimony from several detectives and other law enforcement personnel that responded to the scene of the shooting on that night. And we've also heard from the 911 operator who took Bob Ward's call. Earlier this morning, we replayed that 911 call for you, which is a key piece of the prosecution's case, because in the call, Bob Ward tells the 911 operator, "I shot my wife." It is only a few minutes into into the call, and by the way, he's very calm when he's speaking, doesn't seem to have much emotion. It's only a few minutes into the call when the 911 operator asks whether he did this on purpose or it was an accident that he says it was an accident. Now, right before the break, we replayed a few minutes of the prosecution's opening statements in which they claim Bob Ward changed his story 3 times. They say, yeah, he told the 911 operator it was an accident, but he told other people that his wife committed suicide, and then he told a reporter that he was essentially passed out on his porch outside, doesn't really remember what had happened. All he remembers was going upstairs into the bedroom. Diane Ward was drunk. She had the gun. They struggled, and then the gun went off, and she accidentally shot herself. So the prosecution here trying to say that this guy has changed his story multiple times and that he admitted to killing his wife, but the defense says this was a tragic accident. So now I want to play a few minutes from the defense's opening statements when they outline their arguments. Let's take a listen.
Good morning. As I said yesterday, my name is Craig Gillen, and I represent Bob Ward. What happened on the night of September the 21st, 2009 was a very deep tragedy. It was an accident, a tragic, tragic accident that took place in the home of Diane and Bob Ward, that took place in their bedroom. Actually, as you will learn, and this will become important during the trial of the case, it actually took place on Mr. Ward's side of the bed. It took place on Mr. Ward's side of the bed. We'll get into that later. But what happened there was a tragedy. What did Mr. Ward do after that tragic accident? He immediately called the authorities. The first thing that he did was call the authorities. Now, you're going to learn, and we want you to really think about this 911 call, because what you're going to learn is he actually called 411. In shock, excuse me, stunned, been drinking, maybe slurring his words a bit. So he calls 411. And they transfer him over to 911. And that's when he's talking to the operator. This call is very important. Excuse me. Very important. He says, I shot my wife. And he says in the same call that the state will stress and did stress in their opening and will stress in their closing. In that same call, when he was stunned and shocked, he explained it was an accident. And it was a tragic, tragic accident.
Welcome back. We have a live feed right now out of the Orange County courtroom where we are waiting for day 3 of Bob Ward's trial to begin. And we see Bob Ward sitting there in the middle of his defense team. And I have Jayne Weintraub, criminal defense attorney, on the line with me via Skype. Jayne, as we wait for day 3 to get underway, I want to ask you quickly about one thing that happened late yesterday in court, and that is that the defense team asked the judge not to allow the jury to be able to take the gun back to the jury room when they deliberate. The defense team doesn't want them to handle the gun. Why might that be?
The only thing that I can think of is, juries love to touch things and they love to look at things and speculate, which is, of course, something defense lawyers never want to happen. But the real reason is this is a .357 Magnum. It is a very strong pull on the trigger. And if I'm speculating correctly, I would think if I were the lawyer, they're going to think she's the woman. She's not going to have the strength, or she's not going to be able to pull it back if she's so drunk or stoned or whatever from the pills. And it's a really hard pull on that trigger.
Interesting. Jayne, thanks for that. Let's go live into the courtroom now where a witness is about to take the stand.
Thank you, Stacey.